Stop me if you've heard this one before. A gruff, veteran operative flies his helicopter under the cover of night, alone, into the humming base of the enemy with eyes trained on every corner. He quietly lands his chopper on the roof of the tallest building, 20 long, dark floors above his objective. The plan? To quickly and silently take out every guard and he's falling off the building to his feet. He's dead. He's dead. This tale of stupid highs and dumber lows is the perfect encapsulation of the Ghost Recon Breakpoint experience so far. It is barely Ghost Recon, but in so many ways it's oh so right, even in contrast to its few missteps. If you know me, you know I was hard on Wildlands when it launched. I did not like it, and that game got better, but I set my expectations lower this time around. I'm going to treat this piece as a more straightforward preview, less highly edited, because I think in the case of this beta, it's important for the gameplay to speak for itself. But in order to understand just how far this game strays from its legacy and what that means for you, the player, I think first we have to get the obvious out of the way. This game is just a few days away from launch, and the first thing you'll notice is it isn't ready. Let me be clear, I very much enjoyed my time with Breakpoint, and upon wrapping up this disclaimer, that's pretty much what the rest of this piece will be about. But I can't get there without addressing the all too common reality of releases like this. If in a few days this game launches in this state, there will be some upset customers. Let's skip past the fact, just for the time being, that the beta didn't even start on time due to an apparently crippling server error that wouldn't allow anyone in, and get to things that aren't server related. I played this game on both PC and console, and on PC, there were big problems. The game hard crashed my entire rig 3 times in the first 3 hours. Let me explain that. That means that the game literally forced my computer to shut down due to an unresolvable technical issue within the game. Not the program, the computer shut down. This was on top of 4 crashes of the game itself. And once inside, well, stuff like this happened multiple times. That's me being stuck on a pipe for like 3 minutes before magically I just wasn't. Here's me trying to talk to an objective NPC, but the command to do so not responding in any way at all to my button presses. This is the frame rate absolutely dipping all over the place, and this is the game just freezing altogether. This doesn't include the fact that multiple times cutscenes played lines of dialogue that had already been said over and over, while the rest of the scene continued to play out as normal, making the scene totally incomprehensible.
You're in trouble. You just wait for that daddy you run in, huh? You cry to your daddy? That what you gotta do? He ain't here every single day.
There's also a feedback problem in PvP on both PC and consoles, where it takes a while for the game to give you any visual or haptic feedback when you've landed a shot on an enemy, or more specifically, killed them. I do genuinely believe that most, if not all of these problems can be solved with a day 1 patch, and likely will. For once, this is a beta that's problems, while obvious, are less foundational and more technical, so I'm not too worried, and you probably shouldn't be either, but they need to be pointed out so they can be fixed. But once you get past all that, well, that's where the game becomes something much more interesting. Ghost Recon Breakpoint veers even further away from what Ghost Recon once was, in almost every single way, but if you can get past that, what you have is a genuinely enjoyable sandbox of mayhem. That comedy of errors that I used in the intro is not an isolated moment of chaos, it's really the game's status quo. Stealth is much improved this time around. The AI reacts and locates you much more realistically, drones hover around objectives in an effort to spot you and alert enemies to your presence and location. They, by the way, can and should be a priority if you want to stay hidden, and thankfully, at least thus far, your gear doesn't seem to impact your ability to play it quiet. In past Ubisoft games like The Division and Assassin's Creed Origins, your gear has become the primary driving force of your ability to utilize different playstyles. If you were even slightly underleveled, your hidden blade wouldn't kill enemies, it would simply stun them and chop away at their health bar a bit, making stealth kind of a non-option. In The Division, a silent headshot will not only alert enemies to your presence, but depending on the level disparity, may only give them a slight headache. But in Breakpoint, regardless of enemy level, a headshot seems to be a headshot. If there's a heavy, he doesn't become a bullet sponge for the sake of creating a moment of tension. One headshot pops off the helmets and another finishes him. And there's also much more realism in the stealth. here, this enemy is wearing a mask. Now watch. A headshot from a silenced rifle killed him, but the ding of his metal mask alerted his cohort. Then there's this. Shooting through this fence led to a realistic chime of metal being struck that also can alert enemies to your location. There's an impressive attention to detail here that lends itself to stealth gameplay. But then the chaos starts to seep right through that fence. Once stealth breaks down, and that happens a lot, the chaos that ensues has also been improved, even if it is, once again, just sheer anarchy. Open combat is much more fun. Taking cover is easier, running and gunning now feels smoother, and things like taking out 5 enemies with 5 shots in less than 5 seconds is really worth blowing your cover for. Parachuting into a base like a Just Cause trailer and letting your heli crash in the distance as you do your best Rambo impression isn't just a viable option now, it's fun. See, the key to gaming chaos is being in control of it, and for once, for the most part, I felt that way. And Ubisoft knows this, and they built a much more interesting skill tree as a result. This spider web of decision paralysis allows you to build out and spec up the class you really want to create, while also doing a reasonable job of avoiding the trap of imitating harder core RPGs. This isn't a skill tree designed to turn you into a stealth-only player or the opposite. It's designed to allow you to mix and match as you please, a tree best for loosening its grasp on the world and how you approach it, as opposed to restricting your options as you get further into the game. And that's best, because this game is, at the most, an RPG light. The same goes for gear, which so far has been parsed out at an extremely quick and satisfying rate, but has also seemed to have very little impact on the actual gameplay, especially when playing a stealth playstyle. Either gear seems to be relatively useless, or it's only going to matter in mid to late game, which is likely, but it's basically a non-factor now as it pertains to the beta. And sure, all missions so far boil down to kill this, grab that, but the beta isn't a place to judge mission variety. However, what is there is a good enough playground for the game's mechanics. But let's talk about that playground, because this game is getting one thing right enough that it's impossible not to be impressed. 2 things surprised me about Breakpoint. I'll talk about the second surprise next, which might be the bigger one, but the first was these tires. Well, what these tires represent. As they drive through the mud here, they dirty. Mud flies from underneath them, and they lose that mud as they hit water or switch terrain. And so many games do this now, but few do it this well. I noticed these tires, and then I looked up and noticed everything else was just as beautiful. This game is stunning in almost every way. What I'm walking through right now is your home base of operations. It's not some random rooftop bar. The lighting, texturing, and color work is astounding. The atmosphere is gorgeous. This isn't an island that's going to drag you down in its oppression. Its bold and bright beauty is the perfect contrast for this story. It is a massive island, but everything from the beaches to the swamps to the mountains is so well realized that it's very easy to immerse yourself in the realities around you, which is the ultimate goal of games. This may seem like a superfluous bit of praise, but it matters. You do a lot of traveling, driving, flying, and walking in this game. If it looked even an iota less beautiful, that might become a chore. It doesn't. And that also complements the second surprise. And this one's early, and they could totally fumble this upon launch, but for now, well... Here's something I really didn't care about in Wildlands. The story. Some loved it, I hated it. I found it tired, cliche, and worst of all, downright uninteresting. It was the millionth version of cartel controls land, leaders are bad guys, take them out and make people happy that I'd played through, and it was just as uninteresting as it had always been. To Breakpoint's credit, I am very interested in the story that's being told thus far in the beta. John Bernthal is your antagonist this time around, and he is expectedly excellent. Here, listen for yourself.
Anytime you're in trouble, you just wait for that daddy of yours to swoop on in, huh? Well, let me tell you something. Your daddy, he ain't here.
His villain, or maybe anti-hero, who knows, is extremely well acted. The tone with which Bernthal plays him in the few clips we see in the beta is both menacing and ambiguous, and it creates genuine intrigue in the character. It helps that the game's facial modeling is ridiculously good. I'm talking the best work Ubisoft has ever done amongst any of their studios, but Bernthal is the foundation of that. Every eyebrow raise, expression, smirk, scowl is caught in a way that works without dancing too far into uncanny valley territory. The same, surprisingly, goes for your created character, who despite being customizable, manages to maintain proper facial features and functions, and expresses and emotes kind of well, regardless of how you make them look. And the voice acting there with the protagonist, by the way, is equally impressive. But I think what's left me most stunned is that this story actually seems to be worth exploring in a way that's usually reserved for the top single-player studios in gaming. And it actually makes me believe that this is the reason why Ubisoft was so willing to give us so much of the game so early on. There is moral and ethical ambiguity here. There's a genuinely interesting sci-fi and militant hook with the drone angle, and the trapped on an island shtick actually comes off like a valuable narrative tool here, given everything that surrounds it contextually. Now, we've only seen a very short bit of the story in the beta, and this all could fall apart and be a total disaster once it's stretched out over the course of dozens of hours. But thus far, I'm for once excited about a narrative in what is essentially a co-op gear chaser. But let's talk about PvP. It's the last piece of the puzzle, and it's very confusing. I have spent the better part of 2 hours trying to formulate my opinion on the PvP experience in Breakpoint, and the best compliment I can pay it at the time of this writing is that I still can't figure out whether or not I like it. The PvP here does good things. What you earn carries over into your character's progression with the main campaign. Awesome. Everyone who enters PvP leaves their perks and levels behind in an effort to level the playing field and not create advantageous loadouts. Great. There's even skill-based matchmaking, and here's where it starts to fall apart. This might be just a beta issue, or maybe it's not even implemented here, but I did not experience any skill-based matchmaking whatsoever. At all. No matter how much I played, I continued to be matched up with players that had either never played before or simply didn't know what they were doing, and it made for an easy and uninteresting romp, and that's saying something, because while I play a lot of video games and enjoy competitive shooters, I'm not some esports god, and certainly shouldn't be having as easy of a time as I did. It doesn't help that the map design here is the polar opposite of the main games, in that it's wildly uninteresting. It's certainly serviceable, the maps are fine, but that is all they are. From there, once the matches begin, they're again just fine. They almost always boil down to 2 teams of 4 trying to kill each other. The objectives almost never become a factor, nor does anyone seem even remotely concerned about them. If you play smart and play slow, you'll probably succeed, and small touches like spotting enemies, knowing when you're marked, and drone use all add a bit of squad-based interaction into the fray, but that's really as interesting as it gets right now. Hopefully the team has a lot more to show for launch, because as of right now, PvP isn't really an attention grabber. I've been very impressed with 2 betas in the past month, which is a far cry from the absolute nonsense that was the betas of the past spring that either entirely misrepresented the final product or showed a non-functional game for what it was long before it launched. But I think there's a lesson to be learned there. I love the Modern Warfare beta, and then a week later we find out they're gating an entire mode onto only one system. 2 steps forward, 1 giant step back. The point? Yes, the Breakpoint beta is very impressive, but it should be. It's a week before the game launches. It is basically just a marketing tactic at this point, a glorified demo without a day 1 patch. What I want is to see Ubisoft release this game with its problems fixed and have what I've played thus far be fully represented across the entirety of the experience. My goal with this piece was to articulate my feelings about this beta, but it's very easy to love 5 to 10 hours of something, like I did here. It's much harder to love something for 30 to 50. Breakpoint could be one of the fall's biggest surprises. It's a sentence I keep seeing, but I think it has to be. I think that statement stands whether it's great or terrible. The paradox of hype. That is it for today's episode, guys. What do you think about what you're seeing here? If you played the beta, are you interested in Ghost Recon Wildlands at all? Do you miss the old, more tactical Ghost Recon, or is this kind of faster, more play it how you see fit Ghost Recon more up your alley? Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, press the like button. If you have not yet done so, hit subscribe as well. Just make sure you don't miss any videos. Also, if you're gonna hit subscribe, also press the little bell if you haven't yet. That just makes sure you're actually notified when I put out a video, which is a huge deal on this platform because otherwise you may not see it at all. So hit subscribe and the little bell. And before the comments even come in, guys, yes, I am still going to get to Gears 5. There's just been a lot going on, but now this beta's out, I'll have a little bit more time. That may be next. I'm not going to promise that. It's going to take some time, but Gears 5 will come. Until next time, guys, I'm out.